Well, it is absolutely amazing to me how that the two things prophesied in the Bible for the near future continue to dominate world headlines. I mean, it's like someone was here 2,000 years ago, saw all this happening, and then went back in a time machine 2,000 years and wrote the prophecies of the Bible. That's exactly how accurate it really is. Now, the two things I'm speaking about, of course, are the war that's going to kill one-third of mankind and the peace agreement that will be signed between Palestinians, Israelis, and the world community. Exactly how that's going to happen, I cannot tell you, but nevertheless, those two things continue to dominate the headlines. For example, in today's Haaretz newspaper, Haaretz is one of the leading publications in the nation of Israel, this article, Fatah, Hamas agree to establish caretaker government without Palestinian Prime Minister Fayyad. Now, what is this all about? Let's make sure we understand who Fatah is, who Hamas is. Fatah is a party which was established by Yasser Arafat and Mahmoud Abbas in 1965. Fatah has been a leading force in Palestinian life since that time, and of course with the death of Yasser Arafat, then Mahmoud Abbas became the heir apparent to that particular party. In the meantime, a rival party, Hamas, that was given birth to by the Muslim Brotherhood of the Islamic Brotherhood of Egypt. This particular party tends to be more radical, refuses to accept Israel's right to exist, and so there's been a rivalry through the years. However, these both existed as one up until elections were held, what was it now, 4 years or so ago. Now, at the time, Israel had misgivings about holding these elections. However, George W. Bush pushed the Israeli government to do it, to allow it, and so finally they did. Well, with bad outcome, because what happened was Hamas won the elections. They then controlled a majority in the parliament. However, Mahmoud Abbas was still the president of the Palestinian Authority. So you had from Fatah, the president, Mahmoud Abbas, and you had from the Hamas organization a domination of the parliament. So you had a power-sharing arrangement. However, the Hamas didn't want to really share power. Therefore, they resorted to military action, and in one day, they drove Mahmoud Abbas and the Fatah organization out of Gaza. And so Mr. Abbas became the ruler of the West Bank up in the area of the occupied territories, as they are called, and then Hamas became the ruler of the population center of the Palestinian people, the area called Gaza. So from then until now, we've had this split in factions. They've made some efforts to bring themselves back together, but so far to no avail. A few months ago, they announced that they had negotiated a deal to reunify so that there would be one Palestinian Authority, not two, but somehow they announced they were going to do it, but it was never implemented. Well, now this development just today is brand new, and that is they have agreed to establish a caretaker government and then to hold open, free, and fair elections come May. So the one condition, however, is Hamas did not want Prime Minister Fayyad involved in this government. They wanted to make sure that Salam Fayyad, who is the prime minister now, was excluded. Now, I'm not sure. I have not been able to find out yet why they are so opposed to him. The response of Salam Fayyad was simply, well, that's okay with me. If this will bring about Palestinian unity, then that's fine. I'll be glad to step aside. However, Mr. Salam Fayyad is probably the favorite leader among the Palestinians to the world community, because it's Salam Fayyad, while everybody else has been playing politics, that has gone out and built the governmental structures necessary for the Palestinians to request statehood from the United Nations. Let me explain. Back in 2009, everybody knew that if the Palestinians gained statehood, they could not govern. They didn't know how to govern. How do you set up mayors, city councils? Who builds the roads? Who runs the sewer system? Who collects the taxes? How does it all work? Well, no one really knew, because the business of the Palestinian Authority had been revolution for all this time. I mean, they knew how to launch terrorist drives and to produce agitation, but to know how to govern a state, that was a whole other question. Well, Salam Fayyad understood this very well, and as prime minister, while Mahmoud Abbas was out there continuing to play politics on the global platform, Mr. Salam Fayyad, the prime minister, began to set about the daily task of building governmental structures. Well, the international community was very happy for this to occur, because they all believe that eventually there's got to be peace between Palestinians and Israelis, and they knew that it was absolutely impossible until the Palestinians actually did build these governmental structures and set up the machinery to be able to govern themselves. So Salam Fayyad has been working very diligently behind the scenes for the last 2 years. He announced a few months ahead of September of 2011, we will be ready. Matter of fact, back in 2009, he's the one that made the statement, give us 2 years, we will have the West Bank territories, the areas of Judea, Samaria, we will have them ready to become the new Palestinian state. Well, worked diligently. He did it about 9 months ago. He once again reiterated, we are on target. We will be ready. And then as the time drew near for the deadline, which had been set, September of 2011, he announced, we are ready. That provoked Mr. Mahmoud Abbas to go to the United Nations, as he did on September the 23rd of this year, saying, we are now ready to be a state. We're asking the UN Security Council to recognize our membership and to also recognize our claims to the pre-1967 lands that Israel occupied in 1967. We're asking you to return those lands to Arab control. Now, let me pause a moment to make sure you understand one thing. These lands were never Palestinian controlled. Most people say, well, the Palestinians had it prior to 1967 and the Jews came and took it. That's not true. The Jordanians occupied that land. The land was occupied prior to World War I by the Ottoman Empire, headed by Turkey. The Ottoman Empire was defeated in the First World War. The British Mandate began, and Britain controlled the territory from about, 1918 until 1948. During this time, there was a lot of struggle on the ground between Arabs and Jews as far as establishing a Palestinian state. Nobody could really win the victory, but the Jews were slowly but surely dreaming of a state, and by 1948, they had 600,000 Jews that had made their way. Now, some Jews had always lived there. There's been a Jewish presence in that land ever since, well, for the last 5,000 years, actually. Hebron is the oldest city on earth, many people say, and the Jews actually had Hebron as their capital 7 years before Jerusalem became their capital. Nevertheless, when all this came down, let me see if I can make this as clear as possible to you. What happened was then the British Mandate continued until May the 14th of 1948. The British had sent signals, we're tired of messing with this, we're getting our people killed, it's nothing but trouble for us, if you all want to fight, we're just going to bow out. So they declared an end to the British Mandate as of May the 14th of 1948. Now, prior to this time, in preparation for this development, the United Nations had decided it was time for the world governmental structure, which the United Nations had become in 1945. It was time for them to step forward and to make a ruling about the Holy Land. So they said, we're going to give part of this for a Palestinian state, we're going to give part of it for an Israeli state. So they developed the 1947 partition plan. I think it was actually November the 29th of 1947, the day they call the Nakba. That's when the world community divided the land up. Well, the Jews were so happy to have a place to call their own, they They graciously and gladly accepted, but the Arabs did not want anything to do with an Israeli, with a Jewish entity anywhere in the Middle East, and so they said, we will not accept it. Well, when the British mandate ended on May the 14th of 1948, this forced the Jews to do something. I mean, when the British pulled out, who's going to be the law of the land? Well, nobody. So in self-defense, the Jews on May the 14th, 1948, the same day that the British mandate expired, they stepped forward and declared independence. Well, when they did, the very next day on May the 15th, the Arabs declared war against the fledgling Jewish state. And that war raged for the next 1 year until 1949. And amazingly, the Jewish people won the war, not only preserving the land that had been granted to them in the UN partition plan, but actually expanding the borders somewhat. However, when the ceasefire was declared in 1949 between Jordan and Israel, not the Palestinians were not a factor at that particular time. When the ceasefire was declared, Jordan controlled East Jerusalem, Israel controlled West Jerusalem. So for the next 19 years, Jerusalem was divided up until 1967. 1967, Nasser of Egypt decided it was time to drive the Zionist entity into the sea, and he kicked out the UN troops, said, get out of here, you're in my way, and he moved his troops up toward the southern border of Israel. Furthermore, he closed the Straits of Tiran, which is an international waterway, and blockaded it from Israeli presence, which it had enjoyed since 1948. Now it blocked it off, thus being an act of war. And when Israel saw that the Arabs' intentions were to drive it into the sea, they decided to jump first. So they did, and they launched a surprise attack against Egypt. They caught their planes on the ground, and in 6 days they defeated Egypt, Syria, and Jordan, sweeping all the way to the West Bank because they were provoked. Now, they had called Jordan and said, if you'll stay out of this war, we won't bother you. We don't have a bone to pick with you. But King Hussein of Jordan didn't feel like he could stand aside while his Arab brethren were fighting against the hated Zionist entity, so he jumped in, and as a result of his aggression against Israel, Israel captured the east side of Jerusalem and then all the way to the Jordan River. That's the way we arrived at where we are today.